When I did the first Coral Sea Dreaming, I'd really only just started to even recognise that I was a professional musician and a composer, and I was actually quite surprised that I ended up getting the contract for that, because I was very young and I wasn't really part of the industry per se. I was living in a different state. Of course, I really, really wanted it, but I was pretty doubtful that I would have any chance at all. Because I was quite young, I didn't really realise or grasp, maybe it's because I didn't dwell on it, the enormity of writing a 55-minute piece of music. And maybe that was in my favour. Working on the first film was very challenging, but at the same time it was very liberating. So when David approached me the second time to do this new film, I was, thrilled to be able to do it. And when he said he wanted to just rework the old piece of music, I was initially a little surprised. Then I could, after further conversations with him, I could see where he was coming from, So the difference with this film was its length. Initially it was suggested that the film would actually be longer, but just by 5 to maybe to 10 minutes, which wasn't going to be too much of a big deal for me. But as it turned out, it was substantially longer, which meant reworking a lot of the themes that I had from the first composition, which turned out to be great. I'm really happy with the way it all sort of happened, and my biggest challenge was rescuing the first composition because we had no master tapes. So it was going back to MIDI files and trying to make that all happen, which, technology has changed so much since I did the first one that we didn't even have the right format to work with initially. And, I was pretty well on my own in this technical void of understanding, and had to kind of make things up as I went along, and eventually got it all together. Yeah, it was interesting to go from, well, we would have the first lot of music, but we don't have any master tapes because they've kind of disappeared, and so we're having to start all over again. So we didn't even have, the vocals or anything, because obviously they were sung in the studio and we didn't have any of the studio tapes. So, I had to do them all over again. But from that, I ended up using more instrumentation and adding more things and different elements that I would have had I been able to initially in the first soundtrack, but really had to wait, and this was an opportunity to do that. So it was fantastic from a creative point of view. For me, it very much comes from within, and it's often stirred by my empathy towards other people or other situations. So it's very much an inward experience for me. It's interesting though, because Coral Sea Dreaming and the underwater footage of David Hannon is just something that's, I guess, pretty extraordinary. And the fact that it is so far removed from our normal reality, I tend to have an empathy with it and with David's perspective of it, which is what you're seeing when you are watching the movie. You're watching what David's seeing, and I think that's interesting, going into somebody else's head. And I think that's another thing that I like about film. Film gives you an opportunity to go into somebody else and see it from their perspective. And David certainly has an extraordinary view of the underwater world that he films, and it just keeps getting better and better. And just when you think that, it just can't get any better than this, he's pulling rabbits out of hats again, and every time I see really new footage that he's shot, I have to pace myself. I actually have to leave the room and have a little break, because it's just so awesome. Literally, I do get awestruck, and I need to go out and take a few deep breaths and compose myself again to come back and see the next lot. It's such a joy to work with David's vision, and not only his vision footage-wise, but also his greater vision and his view on saving what we have left. I think when you get involved in a project like this, it affects your perspective on, I guess, the bigger picture of what's going on. And I remember when we first did the first Coral Sea Dreaming in the 90s, and David's philosophy, which kind of rubbed off on all of us, was about preserving and saving the reefs and doing what we can to understand them better so we can save them and, I guess, turn the whole thing around. When you realise that pretty well everything that David filmed in the first film actually doesn't exist anymore, that's just... I just can't even describe. I have no words to explain how that feels or even what that means. And that's the legacy that we have to live by, that this is the reality of it. So it's almost like preserving the memory of that. And that's a pretty amazing thing to be involved in.